Hello, welcome to the first edition of the Paranormal Peep Show for 2020. So you join us in January, and it's a kind of a cold, damp January, but what do you expect? It's the winter. And we're joined, of course, by my co-host, that's Andy Chaplin. Andy, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Happy New Year to all our listeners, and let's hope 2020 doesn't lead into World War III, but we'll see.
So how was Christmas prior to World War III?
Kind of boring, usual family thing. Family is kind of diminishing year by year. People kind of like pass off to spirit. I find it personally kind of quite a depressing time of year, to be honest. Everyone's kind of like, I don't know, there's a different atmosphere. Maybe I think you need kids to really appreciate Christmas, but seeing as I don't have any kids, I don't know, I just kind of can't wait for it to end, really.
What about the January sales? Is there any uplift in that, or are you just done with it after you've had all this kind of November stuff going on with the Black Friday? I mean, are you just fed up with shops and things?
Well, I've never been into the Black Friday thing, and I read a report recently that the high streets are really not doing very well. I mean, they've been declining for quite a while, but they're really, a lot of them are in crisis. And I don't know if you've noticed where you are, Neil, a lot of shops are kind of like closing down or changing hands. I think more people are buying online, and I can't think the last time I've bought, for instance, an item of clothing from a shop. It's nearly always on somewhere like eBay or Amazon or online in some way, because I think what it is, I know the kind of clothing that I want to get, and so I search for it, and then when it comes up I buy it, as opposed to kind of like browsing in a shop hoping to find something that I might like. I think maybe the way people shop is changing. I don't know what your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, when you go into a well-known high street store that does books and things like that, you go to say, oh, I'm going to have a look in the paranormal, or what they would call the mind, body, spirit section. And you go, and you might find two little books that might be kind of close to what you're interested in, but they're going to be very tame and mild, aren't they? Very kind of mainstream spirituality or gentle, as it were. You won't find hard-hitting stuff in there. And the only place you will find that sort of stuff is when you go on the internet and you look like Amazon or Barnes and Noble or those kind of websites, and you can type in your favorite author, and so you literally just get the book like the next day in some cases. I mean, so authors to be discovered I think it's actually a lot better now than in some ways, because when I've done books in the past, I was told by the publishers that these books only have a shelf life on the store of a bookstore for 3 months, and then that's it, they're off. So you literally got to make a success of the book within 3 months, otherwise you're not going to be bought, basically.
And there's two other aspects to this, of course, as well. The first one, it's a little bit naughty, and we all do it. You might go into a bookshop, find a book and think, oh, that's quite good. And then you might think, is it cheaper somewhere else? Is it cheaper on Amazon? Is it cheaper, secondhand somewhere? And so we remember the title and the author. We go away and search for it cheaper. Another thing is that I think books are becoming slightly redundant these days, because everyone's kind of like, they're either on their Kindle or they're on, online, or it's all about the interviews and the podcasts. Indeed, us doing this at the moment. And so I think kind of like, I won't say books are obsolete, because I don't think they are, but they're declining because the way people take their information on is changing. And of course, books, once they're printed, that's it. For further information, you'd be waiting for, the next book that comes along. Whereas on the internet, it's updated daily, hourly, almost instantaneously, really.
Well, hopefully our next few guests will get some exposure for the books that they've written. We've had them both. Get them. Yes, that's right. We hope we haven't put you off your purchasing power, audience. But our next two guests have been on the show before, and they're both very much into the subject and field of ufology, if that's the correct word to use. So let's go in alphabetical order. We'll start with Ananda Sirisena, who came on our show, I think it was about August time last year in 2019. Ananda, Happy New Year. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Happy New Year to you all on the recording. And yes, indeed, last year we spoke for nearly 2 hours, I think.
Yeah.
Discussed many aspects of ufology and the whole question of extraterrestrial life and the scientific debate going on in the halls of mainstream science at the moment, because, as you probably know, TESS, the NASA satellite, has discovered over 4,100 planets outside of this solar system, or should I say worlds outside of this solar system. So now in the halls of mainstream science, there's a great debate raging as to where is the extraterrestrial life? Why haven't they come to Earth? And they're saying that in the same breath as dismissing UFO reports.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
There's a kind of a double-edged sword with these discoveries. But also to discuss that then is another guest we previously had on the Paranormal Peep Show a few times, and he joins us from Bedfordshire, and that's Philip Kinsella. Philip, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and it's a delight to be back on your program again. Thank you very much indeed. An honor.
Welcome, and Happy New Year to you as well.
Thank you, and to all of you guys as well. So I agree with Ananda. The subject of ufology is something that has always fascinated me, and I am open to all forms of theoretical debate. And I think it's interesting. I think we'll have an interesting discussion.
Great. Okay. Well, Ananda, one of the things that you just said there, you talked about this satellite discovering other planets outside of our solar system, and then you changed it to worlds. Why did you change it from planets to worlds? Because I always read it on the internet as we've discovered so many exoplanets. What made you choose worlds?
Yes, because strictly speaking and technically speaking, the word planet refers to heavenly bodies in our solar system, because the word planets refers to moving objects. You see, the ancient peoples who observed the skies noticed that amongst the fixed stars, some apparent stars were moving. And eventually we discovered that they are the planets. The reason they're moving is because they're much closer to us than the stars are. The stars appear to be fixed in the night sky, in that firmament of heaven, whereas the planets are moving. So the word planets comes from an ancient word that means wanderer, because they wandered amongst the stars. So technically speaking, the word planet should be reserved for worlds within our solar system. However, the word is now used to refer to worlds outside our solar system. So you have the term exoplanet, exo meaning outside our solar system.
And just to be clear, are these planets, worlds, whatever we want to call them, are they saying that they've found evidence that they could support life, or do they even know what the composition is, whether it's rock or whether it's, water, or whether there could be more than that? Or do we not know at this stage?
No, we do know quite a bit about some of them, not all of them. They've discovered water vapor in some of these exoplanets. And today, the announcement was made that they discovered the first Earth-like world within the habitable zone. They call the habitable zone the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah.
Because of the reference to the porridge being at the right temperature for life. So that comes from the Goldilocks story. So they have this reference to a zone within a solar system at which the temperatures are right for life as we know it. Please note that, for life as we know it, to evolve, to survive, to grow. So for the first time, they've discovered a planet, which they announced today, that is in a habitable zone. And it's not too far away. It's only a few odd light years away from our solar system.
I came across an article, I think it was online, about a NASA astronaut, a lady who claims that aliens already walk amongst us.
Well, that was the British astronaut lady. She was the first. She was the first British astronaut to go into space, although a lot of people think Tim Peake was. But the fact that she's a lady means news broadcasters usually say, the lady who went to space. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's a lady or a gentleman. An astronaut is an astronaut. So, exactly. She did say, she was, of course, referring not necessarily to intelligent life, but she's convinced that there is life out there in the universe. It's a big galaxy after all, so why should we limit our mentality to think that there is no life out there and that the only life is us here? the best thing since sliced bread in the universe. Ha ha.
Or porridge.
Porridge, indeed, yes. So the number of exoplanets is over 4,100 now on the NASA catalogs. And in the coming months and years, we will discover many, many more. Because TESS, the satellite that's looking for extra solar planets, is very active. It's doing a good job. It's detecting all of these, and then they do further analysis, spectrum analysis, and that's how they've discovered some water vapor on some of these planets. Some of them are huge, much larger than Terra being the Greek name for Earth. Some about the size of Jupiter and Saturn, others smaller.
And I think there's, what was it that was going to go into supernova? They reckon Betelgeuse, which I think is a sun, isn't it?
Yes, it's a sun that's dimming. Correct. Yes.
And it could be as bright as the moon in the sky. That'd be interesting.
If it does become a supernova, yes.
How long is that likely to take to occur? Because these things, like, even when they've gone supernova, we're still waiting around like a bus stop for these things to happen, because like the light takes so long to get to us.
Yes, they can't predict with Betelgeuse how long it's going to, whether it's going to become a supernova and in what time frame it's going to happen. All they can say is that it's dimming, remarkably quickly dimming. So one could say that perhaps they might be able to make an assessment as to when it might blow up eventually into a supernova. Of course, that would be spectacular in the night sky.
It could have already happened, of course, and we're still waiting for that light to reach us. The dim light is,
light, as we know, light travels at about 186,000 miles per second, but our stars are very, very far away, so it's going to take quite a few years. Let's face it, the nearest star to us is Proxima Centauri, and that's 4 1/3 light years away. So something even more distant would take a lot longer for us to perceive.
Sorry, there's also another odd thing happening. Apparently, the magnetic North Pole is slipping towards Siberia as well.
Indeed, it has been for quite a while, and that is an interesting aspect of the fact that there are changes taking place on this Earth, apart from the climatic changes, as well as all the other planets in this solar system. And these are rapid changes, and these have been happening since about the 1970 time frame, which is quite interesting to note.
And isn't it the case that the sun's also warming up? Because I think NASA put on their website that the sun is getting hotter, but then I think they reversed it and said, oh, no, it's not.
Sometimes they can't make up their mind. Sometimes they put statements out which they think might trigger too much interest in extraterrestrial life locally. You know, they're happy with Radio SETI because that's the long, long way away. But if there is intelligent extraterrestrial life closer to Earth, that's more of a challenge. We're now going to have to face up to the reality that our childhood will come to an end very soon.
Philip Kinsella on the line there from Bedfordshire. Now, he's just written a book, which I know is going to come out shortly in 2020, about the public being, like you're saying, are we grown up and ready for this? Philip, can you explain a bit about your book and the title? Because I think it's kind of pertinent to what we're discussing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've written a few UFO books, and the last one was A Passage Through Eternity, The Enigma of the Dead, UFOs and Aliens, which dealt with the theoretical aspect of the soul incarnation and the cloning aspect of what possibly the Greys could be. A little bit deep there. But I decided to work on a new book because Ananda's correct, especially where NASA's concerned, because as we all know, the famous line is never a straight answer. And so I wanted to write a book to illustrate certain very famous cases and some not so well known, and establishing exactly what's going on with regards to the public being misled into the reality of the UFO phenomenon. And I've read Ananda's most excellent book, Massive Vimana UFO Over the Atomic Weapons Establishment, A Challenge for Parliament. And reading that made me smile, because a lot of what Ananda's put in his book is exactly what I've stated within mine. And I believe that the public are being misled. And since the inception of the Roswell, New Mexico crash landing, one of the other arguments I've stated here is, if you go to Wikipedia, the official explanation from their end, it was a weather balloon. And the original narrative had been that it had been a crash disk. So we start from there, and of course we evolve and move on to several theoretical aspects of what we could be dealing with. And of course, the subject matter is so multi-complex, so multi-dimensional. But as I said, I'm very open to all forms of speculative conclusions. So my book, the new book, You, the Public Deceived, The Grand UFO Deception, is not a retake of Philip Klass's book. He was the infamous debunker, and actually is there to inform the public that, the wool is still being pulled over our eyes with regards to the UFO reality, and we seem to be going around in circles, and we have to look outside the box of conventional thinking in order to, because we tend to put the UFO into a physical nuts and bolts construct, and we put it in a box and label it UFO. But I believe that there are other aspects to this that we need to examine and explore and I believe it's linked with creation. I believe it's linked with the soul, incarnation, reincarnation, other aspects. And this is something the public will not be able to get their head around.
And what do you think?
Maybe slowly. It's a matter of educating the public with the correct information, which should be scientific. And you mentioned Philip Klass there, the famous debunker. I exchanged some correspondence with him many, many years ago. And he actually replied to my letter saying, I'm replying to you because you were reasonably polite. Well, I am a polite person in general, and it seems he used to receive a lot of letters from impolite people, and he would never bother to answer. If you remember, he wrote a few books about debunking UFOs, and in his books he said, if the UFOs are proved to exist, I will return the money you paid for my books. But of course, he's passed on now, so I can't get any money back from him, especially as the US Navy released the film footage in November 2017, just a couple of years ago. That will change science. That will change the whole aspect of how we regard UFOs. And I want to stress that this is a very important happening. The fact that the Department of Defense, through the Pentagon, released those films, not just the radar films, but also the infrared films, and allowed the pilots of those planes to be interviewed on TV and so on, is a very important step forward. And I think they were testing the waters. They wanted to see whether there'll be panic in the streets.
And this was the gimbal and the go fast, wasn't it?
Correct, the gimbal go fast.
However, one of the pilots has now gone dead. Sorry, not dead, gone silent, as in not talking. Because there was actually, funny enough, over Christmas there was a show about it. I can't remember the name of it, and they were interviewing the pilot, and they wanted to follow up, and he just said no. He just said no further communication. Was that David Fravell? It was, I can't remember. I think it was one of the Navy pilots. It was a young chap, dark hair. I forget the name, but he did go off radar. Pardon the pun.
Yeah. Sometimes when people go public with this information, the pressure can become unbearable. If, especially when skeptics start attacking them, it's okay if people who are sympathetic to your point of view say, oh, how nice that you spoke and so on. However, remember, we have David Fravell, the captain of one of those F-18 fighters on record. He gave many interviews. He even went to one of the UFO conferences in America and spoke there. And he says, well, I know what I saw. I don't think it was from this world. Were there aliens in there? I don't know. He's honest enough to admit that. But he says the flight characteristics displayed by that Tic Tac were extraordinary. And I don't know if you're aware of the fact that the thorough scientific analysis has been done on those films.
Yeah.
And the speeds, the accelerations, the G-forces that anybody inside that Tic Tac would have had to endure would have meant death for any of us, crushing death.
2.5 times the speed of sound, I think, from memory, is what they said.
Yes, I have seen the full technical report, and it's extraordinary. The other thing about the analysis done is that these objects can work in 3 different environments. So the same object can be in the upper atmosphere, the same object can be in the lower atmosphere, and then it can go into water and come out of water. It's like one of our submarines could be flying, and we know that's not possible. So these objects are based on an extremely advanced technology. And when I say advanced, I'm not talking about 2,000 or 3,000 years advancement. I'm talking about possibly hundreds of thousands of years advancement ahead of us. So we have a lot of catching up to do.
However, I'm just thinking on the nuclear side of things. I've seen footage of nuclear rockets or missiles being fired from undersea submarines, where they literally come out the silo inside the sub, through the water and up out the, because it shows it breaking the surface of the water, shoots up into the air, and I presume it goes into maybe the lower part of the stratosphere. I don't know what height they go to go, presumably in almost a slight orbit where it goes over maybe the continent and theoretically crashes in your enemy's territory. So we have kind of technology similar, maybe.
No, be careful there. That doesn't mean that can travel in the water like a submarine can. That was shot out of a submarine.
So
it has nowhere else to go but up.
Yeah.
It's not a water vessel. You understand what I mean, like a submarine or a ship.
It's the thrust of the rocket, literally pushing it out.
Correct, yeah. So the analysis done based on the US Navy film is that these objects are extraordinary. They truly are extraordinary. They appear to defy the known laws of physics. Okay, now we don't know all the laws of physics. That's the first thing to say. We're discovering new laws every day in physics, in chemistry, in biology, in astronomy, and so on. So we certainly don't know all the laws of the universe, and whoever says we do is being foolish. And I forget the wise man who said, what we know is very little, and what we don't know is very, very large. So as we go out into space, and let's face it, we're just become a space-faring planet, we will discover things. I explained in my book, we will discover things that at the moment have no explanation, and possibly for the next 200 years might have no explanation. I'll talk about those findings on the moon and Mars later on. But before I do, I just want to get back to books. I just want to make it clear to all your listeners that I was one of the co-authors of the book that was published in 1998 called The Case for the Face, Scientists Examine the Evidence for Alien Artifacts on Mars. This book was published and written by the Society for Planetary Safety Research, SPSR, of which I am the current president. And the book, published by Adventures Unlimited, sold very well in 1998 because it was just prior to the Mars Global Surveyor going into orbit around the planet. And what we were doing in that book was studying the so-called face on Mars to see what the scientific evidence is as to its artificiality or not. So that was the first book that I co-authored. The second book I should mention is called UFOs and the Extraterrestrial Message. That book was written by the executive secretary of the Atheist Society, Richard Lawrence, and I did quite a bit of the research for him for that book. And now I should mention my own book, which was published in 2019, which Philip has kindly mentioned already. It's called Massive Vimana over the Atomic Weapons Establishment. The word Vimana comes from the Sanskrit language. It's a reference to aerial objects that were written about 3,000 years ago in the ancient Indian epics, which you may have heard about, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Both of these ancient Indian books describe aerial objects in the sky. They describe warfare going on in the sky. These could be ancient references to the previous civilizations like Atlantis and Lemuria, and possibly giving us some hints as to how those civilizations went down, maybe atomic warfare in the skies. So the word Vimana is something I deliberately put into the title of my book, because it's being used more and more by UFO researchers, because people are saying, hey, these ancient texts describe aerial vehicles, space traveling in the skies, 7 or 8 stories high. So they were immense spacecraft of some kind, and there could be a relationship with the modern UFO phenomenon.
And of course, Trump has recently set up a Space Command, which was really
Space Force, isn't it? Space Force, or
yes,
something
Space
like
Force.
that.
Yeah.
Philip, are we able, do you think, to comprehend what is happening with? Are they visitors from outer space, or are they visitors from other dimensions? And are they interested in us as a race, or are they just interested in the technology we have, like atomic research establishments? I mean, what do you think could be the answer to those?
Well, that is a complex question, but I'll try and answer it. And I also have to thank you, Neil, because you have gone through my manuscript, You the Public Deceived. So a massive hats off to you for going through the manuscript. That's coming out later this year. But I do agree, Ananda's correct. I mean, when you're dealing with the UFO phenomenon, it's not just about the case studies that we've had since the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and up to present day. They are indeed and have been catalogued within our ancient history, our texts. And I believe also that a lot of our ancient history has been deliberately suppressed so that we find it incredibly difficult to find our actual origins. And I believe that there is a reason behind this, because this goes into a much larger aspect of control and manipulation, mental manipulation. But certainly, I believe that most of the public will be ready for this. I believe that a lot of other people will not, and I believe that is quite evident on the news when there is some kind of fuel shortage or water shortage, and then we have anarchy. So I think there's a part of our society which is ready and open. There is another part, unfortunately, and as Ananda said quite beautifully, people need to be educated. And I've said this also in the book. Surprisingly, I've said that, if we can educate the masses, then we'd have more of an understanding of what we're dealing with. And I know that with my dealings with NUFORS, which is the National UFO Reporting Service, which was created by Nige R., we've stated that to government, we've just sent a letter off about this program that needs to be initiated. Will we be heard with that? No, I don't think we will. But I think it's wonderful that people like yourselves, Neil and Andy and Ananda, are remarkable individuals who are fighting for that truth. And what you're doing with these programs is educating the public, so to speak. But going back to the Ananda's point about the historical significance, this obviously indicates that there are different species of extraterrestrials, some good, some not so good. And it's like humans, we have the good, the bad, and the downright ugly, I'm afraid. and I believe that, that the powers that be, or a small faction of them, perhaps, know the reality of some of this and are at pains to keep the whole, clockwork system of the world working in tandem without it being upset. So I believe there's going to be a revolution where people of the mind, where people will begin to understand that we've been had big time and that we need to reevaluate our history, creation, and a lot of other things that have been denied us.
Indeed, you're right, Philip. And let me point out that the subtitle of my book, Massive Vimana Over the Atomic Weapons Establishment, is A Challenge for Parliament. Yes. And I wrote this book almost like a report for Parliament, because what we need to do is bring this information forward by discussion with our members of Parliament. It is a fact that throughout the decades, many people have been interested in UFOs, but they've never approached their members of Parliament, like I did mine, in order to bring this subject before Parliament. And in my book, I described what happened when I approached my member of Parliament with regard to the sighting of that massive UFO, or Vimana, over the atomic weapons establishment. There's a serious security risk in this story as well. And the witnesses, I wasn't the witness, but the witnesses' main concern was the fact that this huge object, and I'm talking about something that was 2 football fields in length, was so close to to Aldermaston Boroughfield, and which is why I approached my member of Parliament, and he managed to get a reply from Aldermaston, which is in my book. So it's certainly worth reading and reading clearly to understand the response that we get. I would also like every reader of my book to approach their member of Parliament with the book to say, hey, look, you need to read this because you need to bring this forward to Parliament. Now, I know we had a House of Lords debate way back in the 1970s, but that's not what's needed. What we need are all the members of Parliament to take an active interest in this and say, hey, what's going on? Why the cover-up?
Mm-hmm. Do you think the main problem, though, is that if you present it, because most members of Parliament are concerned with, local constituencies and motorways and roads and airports and things like this, you bring up something like UFOs, the eyes roll back and they just kind of think, well, just delegate it to the military, Well, yes, you have to point out to them that there are inherent security risks. If these objects can evade our radar, if they can evade our camera systems, if they can evade being photographed by satellites, then that is a very serious security risk for the nation as a whole. We have Air Force, Army, and Navy. For what reason? For the defense of the nation. So if there are objects that can roam about freely and escape detection, that is a serious problem, which our members of Parliament, instead of rolling back their eyes, should say, hey, you're bringing up something very interesting here. We obviously have to work with our military. I have a saying, and I've been saying this for years, even on the public platform, prime ministers come and go, presidents come and go, political parties come and go, but military intelligence is always there in the background. Mm. And if anyone knows a lot about these objects, it is military intelligence. Mm. I mean, there could be a possibility that they do know what's going on, but they're obviously not going to tell the public.
Well, it's obvious why they're not going to tell the public. That's because they're interested in the propulsion secrets of the flying saucers. That's why anyone who has the propulsion secrets of the flying saucers is going to be way ahead from a military advantage point of view. So now I don't believe that any nation on Earth has cracked the propulsion secrets of the flying saucer as yet. Oh, they have been researching it for sure, from Area 51 to sites here in Britain and France and everywhere else, and no doubt Russia and China and most of the nations in the world are interested in this subject. Let me tell you something else. Many years ago, I wrote to the president of Sri Lanka. I was born in Sri Lanka, you see, although I live in Britain. This was about the subject of unidentified flying objects. And I was surprised at the speed at which I received a reply from the president's office. Huh. And what he essentially said is, I'm passing your letter on to the Minister of Science, who will reply to you in due course. But of course, we are keeping an eye on what the Americans will say. So about a month later, I received a reply from the Minister of Science, and he essentially said, we don't do very much research in Sri Lanka on the subject, but we are interested in what nations like the United States of America say about the subject. Mm. So if the USA is covering up, then the rest of the world is being withheld information. So that's why I think this release by the US Navy is a very great step forward. Eventually, the skeptical scientists will change their minds because it's in the nature of science. You go where the evidence leads you. If you're a good scientist, that is. If you're not a good scientist, then you might close your mind and remain skeptical. But all the good scientists I know are open-minded. And I know many open-minded good scientists who would not reject this information that the US Navy released in December 2017. The fact that a very thorough scientific analysis has been done is indicative of the fact that the times are changing. It may be a very slow change, but then that's okay. Sometimes humanity cannot take a very rapid change, and a slow change might be better for us. I don't know. What do you think?
Philip, what do you think?
Well, all I can tell you, Ananda, is that, I have seen UFOs myself, and the last one had been pretty spectacular. On the 9th of April 2016 at precisely 11:15 p.m. at night. And this, the episode had been filmed, Neil knows about this, by my niece, who had, we'd been to an early birthday celebration, and my niece and my sister had gone home to a neighboring village. And my niece had obviously tracked these objects and was trying to contact me at the time that I was driving home with my brother. And we could see these three huge luminous white spheres hanging silently in triangular formation above our house. And my first feeling was that they were workmen's lanterns. It was a clear night, a starlit night, quite cold. And of course, the realization as I brought the car under Cow Bridge and towards our road that they were not and got out. Now, you mentioned in your book something that made me smile, because when we got out to view the objects that were massive, there were three of them, and they were just hanging there, they made no sound, is that it appeared that they're able to distort time. Now, I didn't lose any time, but I will tell you one of the strangest things that I will always remember is the fact that not one person was walking down the road. There was not one person anywhere at all. You could hear a pin drop. Now, the UFOs, one of them had moved and done a very strange maneuver, moved back to its original position. This has all been written about and recorded and analyzed. And then they moved off in military position that you could, silently, and other people have witnessed them. But this technology that you speak of, Ananda, is incredible because these objects are able to distort reality. And I did feel that going back logically, because I, like you and many other people, I don't suffer fools gladly. I'm not a scientist, but I look at things on a rational level. what those objects did, I believe, was that so many other people report within their encounters, the genuine encounters, is that they seem to distort the time sphere or the area around you, so no one is there. That is the one thing that I could not get out of my head. There was not one car, there was not one person or someone out walking their dog or coming back from the pub down the road, or the cars that come down our very small road all the time. And my brother and I actually clocked this.
Yes.
And that is something that, you tend to think about these crafts as physical in nature, but the technology that they use must be incredible because they're able to distort, maybe stopping people from coming, or it could have been that there was no one around. But I find that hard to believe because no one else saw, my niece saw them, some other people witnessed them, but the people around that area, it was like they all were asleep.
Yeah, it's similar to the witnesses who saw the object of the atomic weapons establishment. They were surprised that there were no cars going down that road at 6:30, 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning, when that road is fairly quite busy. I agree with you, Philip. These objects can distort. Perhaps the word distort is wrong. Can distort space and time.
Yeah.
Maybe I should say, rather than distort, manipulate space and time in such a way that they can do essentially whatever they wish. And that might sound strange, but I remember many years ago there was a debate at the American Astronautics Society, and one of the skeptical scientists, he thumped the podium and said, "These people who believe in UFOs are saying that they can do anything they wish. Well, we can't do anything we wish, so I don't believe they can do anything they wish." It's a strange way of thinking, but we mentioned Philip Klass, who was a well-known skeptic and debunker, and there have been people like that. That's because that's part of the cover-up. You see, that what they want to do is create as much confusion as possible, so people now don't know what to believe.
Yeah.
Well, what you have to do is discriminate carefully between that which is true and that which is false, and just believe that which is true, and drop that which is false. Now, that may sound easier to do than it is to say. However, I've been investigating this subject since 1964. Which is quite a long time. That's since the day I had my own sighting, and similar to Philip's sighting that he just mentioned, mine was 3 flying discs in the sky forming a triangle, but not a nighttime sighting. This was a morning sighting just before 9 a.m. I was on my way to school with 2 of my school friends, and all 3 of us saw these objects. And from that day on, I realized that I have to study this phenomenon. I have to get to the bottom of it, and getting to the bottom of it also meant investigating claims of contact, such as the Aetherius Society and Dr. George King.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, we go to him because I mentioned him in my new book, and as I said to you before we started being interviewed, that I didn't realize about Dr. George King until it came up by chance, and then I started discovering a little bit more about him, and Neil had helped me. We were trying to find some more information about Jane Roberts, who was the author of Seth Speaks material in America, and of course trying to create an understanding within the public that communication can be achieved through heightening sense of awareness, conscious awareness, and that certain individuals have that ability. And this is why George King popped up, and of course I then got in touch with the Aetherian Society, and they were very much helpful. So you know a lot more about the guy than I do.
I met him. I met Dr. George King, and
if we can give some background on him, that might help our listeners understand where we're going with this, because he was just an ordinary guy, but practiced meditation. Is that correct?
That's correct. He practiced yoga for many, many years, and I'll give his story in his own words, as it were. the claims that he made. He said that in 1954, I think it was in May 1954, he received a command to prepare himself to become the voice of interplanetary parliament. Now, in 1954, he had no idea what interplanetary parliament was, or that even such a thing existed. But 8 days after he received that message, he says, an Indian Swami, a yogi from the Himalayas, walked through his locked door, sat down opposite him, and told him that he knew about the experience he'd had 8 days before, and that he was indeed being asked to prepare himself to become a voice channel for interplanetary intelligence to speak through him. And this Indian Swami gave him some very advanced yoga exercises to do, which he diligently practiced until he was able to establish telepathic rapport with very advanced intelligences from within this solar system. And I want to stress that point. Dr. George King never backed away from that statement, even when NASA was saying there is no sign of life on the other planets. He said he was adamant that this is life that is much more advanced than we are, and that they were able to speak through him when he went into a yogic samadhic trance. So obviously he created quite a stir in London in the 50s, and it wasn't long before BBC asked him to come and do an interview, which he did on the 21st of May 1959 on a program called Lifeline on the BBC channel. Well, there was only one BBC channel in those days. And you will find a recording of that quite astounding interview on the BBC website. If you do a search for something called The Man from Mars, you will find George King's appearance on BBC in 1959. And during that interview, they asked him whether he would then go into a yogic trance and receive a message. And he said, yes, he will try. And he did. And he succeeded in getting a very brief message over. The interviewer said, we have very little time, so whatever message you're giving has to be fairly short. So you will see all this in the archives, the BBC archives. Very interesting man. George King is an Englishman. He was an Englishman. He passed away in 1997, but between the years of 1956 and 1997, he recorded many, many transmissions, as he called them, cosmic transmissions, through his larynx, his own voice, when he was in a yoga trance. And
what did his messages say? What
the huge subjects, everything covered from how to live our life on Earth successfully, how to obey the laws of the cosmos, about the planets, the other planets in this solar system. You can't give a quick, short answer to your question, Andy. You can obtain some of these recordings from the Aetherius Society, which is based in Fulham, in London, Fulham Road, London. And you can purchase some of these transmissions. They're very, very interesting indeed. And Dr. King himself was a very knowledgeable man. He didn't claim to be a scientist. He claimed to be a yogi, primarily a yogi, and a teacher of metaphysical knowledge or spiritual knowledge, however way you want to look at it. It's knowledge, new knowledge being given to mankind. And if you read any of the books he's written, you will find an answer to your question in any of the books you read. Let me give you a couple of examples. He wrote a book called The Nine Freedoms, which in my opinion is one of the greatest philosophical writings about the religions on this earth. He wrote, the Aetherius Society also has a book of practice called The 12 Blessings, which are very interesting blessings. But if you read the text in the book, you will realize that it is actually a cosmic concept. It's a concept of what the universe actually is like. So there's 2 books there to get you started, Andy, if you're interested in the answer, what was said through George King.
Did the information tie up with, for instance, the Seth material and various other kind of channelers?
Most of it did, yes. You have to bear in mind that in the field of the 1950s contactees, there were quite a few charlatans.
Yeah.
Quite a few people who were in there for money or fun or maybe disinformation agents. So you've got to be very careful about information that was given around that time. And there are 1 or 2 notorious characters. I do not want to mention names here because I do not want to condemn anyone. But I will say this. If you ask me about Dr. George King, I will say I endorse him as a contactee.
Right.
Yes, and I agree with you totally, because when I started looking into this amazing man, I was incredibly touched, and I have seen the films of him. I've got one of his books I ordered straight away when I started researching into his amazing work. And so he actually answered something because of his ideas about life evolving on planets or worlds are seen through higher vibrational energy systems or densities.
Yes.
Like the signals going through a TV set, we can't see them, and yet there are real things occurring within them. We are just the instruments to collect that data, that information. So this was part and parcel to the research that I was doing for the new book, and it's just incredible. I don't think it was by chance. Neil was helping me. He's helped me out with all of the book, but I think that it didn't come by chance. I was meant to have that information, and although
at the right time.
It's just like, no, I believe that certain things happen within an individual's life for a reason, and a personal reason, maybe a very deep, dare I use the word, spiritual reason or conscious reason. So I also endorse him myself completely. I mean, he is legitimate and totally wonderful man, and I only wish that I would have been able to meet him, but alas, that was never meant to be.
I met him in 1968. What I did was I got on a plane and went to Los Angeles to meet him. Probably one of the few UFO researchers who can honestly say that he did that. I've heard a lot of criticism of Dr. George King from so-called UFO researchers who have never done their research. Well, I did my research. I went over so I could meet him and talk to him, chat to him, and ask him questions. He was a wonderful host, quite a shy gentleman. As I said, he was born in England, near Wellington in Shropshire in 1919. And after his initial contact, he decided to start the Aetherius Society and kept it going, and it's still active today. And in that time, I think he recorded over 500 cosmic transmissions given through him while he was in a yoga trance. I'm sure that's a world record by any accounts. And it's up to people, if they're interested, to study these. You can study them by purchasing the books. You can study them by purchasing some of the tape recordings that the Aetherius Society sells. You can study them by going to their meetings and so forth. And before I finish this section, I would like to say that in my book, I have some photographs of something that was discovered on the moon, our moon, which may well be an ancient alien base or the remnants of an ancient alien base. I have those photos in my book. They're obviously NASA photos. And the second point I make is about something discovered on Mars, which is the mound configuration on Mars. And again, I clearly explain this in my book, and I show the photographs, and I give full frame numbers, so any researcher can go to the NASA archives and check these frame numbers to see the photos of this object on the moon, which incidentally was first photographed by the Apollo 15 astronauts. I discovered this almost accidentally when I was studying the pictures taken by the the Apollo 15 astronauts. And eventually we discovered that the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which is still around Moon, taking very close-up clear photos, had photographed these objects. In fact, there are 5 clear Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter photographs of these objects. So this is one of the mysteries that humanity is going to have to face in the coming decades. And the other mystery is the mound configuration on Mars. That's a little bit more technical, but it was thoroughly analyzed by Professor Horace Crater, who was a physicist at the University of Tennessee Space Institute, and he did precise mathematical analysis, and he arrived at the conclusion that this was probably not natural.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Well, we're coming up to a break shortly. There's just one question I'd like to ask. Obviously, George King has passed away in 1997. Right. So is there anyone at the Aetherius Society that's kind of taken on continued communication, like another medium is still in contact with the beings?
No.
Right, okay.
Before his passing, the main communicator, who is known as Aetherius, said that George King will not be replaced. That they had given all the information that they needed to give through him in those years from 1956 onwards. And so it's up to humanity to study that information and use it in their lives. We can use all this spiritual information in our everyday lives and prepare the way eventually for meetings with people from other planets.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Right. Okay. You're listening to the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network with myself, Neil Geddes Ward, Andy Chaplin, Philip Kinsella, and Ananda Sirisena. And we're talking UFOs, the Aetherius Society. And in part 2, join us for more, where we'll be talking about objects on Mars and the moon. This is the Paranormal Peep Show.
Well, here's the President returning from his trip to the black hole. How did you pass the time, sir?
Listening to the Paranormal UK Radio.
Well, it's marvelous seeing a small trump emerging from the mighty black hole.
Ooh, come in. Sit down, relax, and enjoy the show.
Hi folks, you're listening to the Paranormal Peep Show. So we were talking, I think, at some point about the Mars faces and the kind of like strange anomalies on Mars. I believe those pyramids up there as well that match the Giza pyramids. Ananda, do you want to kind of go into that a little bit?
Yes, just before the break, I mentioned the mound configuration on Mars. Let me explain that a little bit more. For people who are not familiar with this, on Mars, in the northern region of Mars, there's an area that's called Cydonia, and this is where the famous face was observed in 1978. Now, in that same region, researchers noticed some shiny mounds, and the reflectivity of those mounds suggested that they had a very bright tip or surface. So we did an analysis, and the primary analysis was done by Professor Horace Crater, who, as I said earlier, was a professor of physics for 40 years at the University of Tennessee Space Institute. And he came to the conclusion at the end of his analysis that this was quite extraordinary. Now, in those days, we only had the Viking photos the two Viking orbiters that went to Mars and put down 2 landers. I'll come back to the landers in a moment, but the 2 Viking orbiters took photographs from a distance of about 1,000 kilometers, and the photos, although they were not too bad for the technology of the age, they were not extremely clear. So we had to wait till the 90s when the Mars Global Surveyor took some better photographs, much higher resolution, and we were able to see that these were indeed mounds, and we used the mounds carefully because they were not necessarily shaped like pyramids on Earth are, but they may well be eroded pyramids, eroded over a very long period of time. They could be as much as 1 million years old. We don't know. Now, it's the pattern that they form that is most interesting. And I have in my book given a clear indication of the pattern and the angles that they create, namely repeating triangles and parallelograms, which are suggestive of intelligent layout. The mounds themselves are of various sizes, and there are primarily 6 mounds that were investigated by Professor Crater. And if you compare them to the Great Pyramid at Giza in Egypt, which is about 230 meters square, these mounds are between 280 and 480 meters in size. So they're of a similar scale. So that is quite interesting. And one of those mounds certainly looks like it may be a tip of a pyramid. Now, we don't know any more than that, other than to say that the European Space Agency also rephotographed the same area and gave us some pretty clear pictures of the mounds, and that pattern was confirmed. So the pattern that Horace Crater analyzed way back in the 1990s was based on the Viking photos of 76, and we had to wait till the late 1980s before we got reconfirmation from NASA, and now a third confirmation from the European Space Agency. So I've given all this information in my book, including the frame numbers and so on, and any researcher can go to NASA and obtain these images and study the pattern themselves, and they will be quite amazed when they see what Professor Horace Crater discovered. As I said, this pattern is not going to go away. It's been on Mars for a very long time, and it's going to remain on Mars. One day when we eventually land people on Mars, and with some sense, go to this area of Cydonia to have a look at the face and the other pyramids and the mounds, there will be some interesting geological, in quotes, discoveries made in that region of Mars. That's one of the mysteries. The other mystery I mentioned was the one on the moon. Now, the interesting story about this is I was looking at some of the photographs that had been taken by the astronauts on Apollo 15. Apollo 15 was the 4th mission to land men on the moon. And it was the mission that tested the lunar roving vehicle for the first time. And they went to explore the geology of the Hadley-Rill Apennine region on the moon. And I was looking at one of these photos, and I noticed what appeared to be 2 objects that looked like walls, long, straight walls. So I thought, that's strange. Let me contact my acquaintance in America, the guy who runs the Lunascan project. And I sent these to him, and he said, these have already been on the internet, but nobody seems to know where they are. I said, well, I can tell you where they are because I found them on the photos taken by the Apollo 15 astronauts. And I told him they're in the region known as Paracelsus on the far side of the moon. And he said, okay, give me a couple of days. I'll look up the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter images. And he came back with one very clear picture of these objects. And I present photos of that in my book as well. So my book is worth buying, if only for those photos, if nothing else. Now, this is another mystery, which we are hoping might be resolved either by NASA or by the Indian Space Agency or by the Chinese Space Agency or anyone else who's going to go to the moon. Let's go to the far side, put a lander down in Paracelsus, the crater called Paracelsus, and send a rover to investigate these objects further. Send us pictures from the moon surface of these objects. Tell us what they are. Some people say, oh, they're just moon rocks. Well, if you have studied moon rocks, you will know that these are not just moon rocks. There's something.
I've seen the pictures. They're very, very straight edged. They almost look like beams of construction of some material or something. Philip, you've seen the pictures, haven't you?
I have, and I've got them in front of me, and they're really quite incredible. And from one of the photographs, on page 93, there is a beautiful picture of an elevated view of these walls, and you can clearly see that they appear to be some form of architectural design. They're not just some space rock. And I think a lot of the times, it gives us all a headache because we just want NASA to say, come on, be straight with us. Give us what we really want, because there's been so much controversy and covering of these images that, it's left to the public's imagination. But looking at the pictures clearly demonstrates that these are huge. They're massive. They're not just, something that's, rolled there. There's definitely design to them, construction. You can see straight away.
Yes, I agree with that. And we're talking about objects that are about 120 meters in length. Okay, so imagine a wall 120 meters in length that appears to have been built out of the regolith of the moon. And the photo that Philip mentioned on page 93 of my book appears to show what looks like an entrance to a building. Yeah. Which is why I said, could this be the remnants of an ancient alien base on the moon? Well, we don't know the full answer to that question. We need to investigate further, which is why we're hoping some of the space agencies will send some kind of rover back and drop. We know that the Chinese space agency did go to the far side of the moon. They put a lander down, and interestingly, they discovered some interesting substances on that far side of the moon. I don't know if people had heard about that, but they haven't given us a detailed analysis of what that substance was that they discovered on the far side of the moon. What I'd like them to do is to veer towards Paracelsus and look at these objects that are so clearly shown in the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter photographs.
The problem being that NASA kind of, every time someone points out a face on Mars or a pyramid or something like in Cydonia of interest, every time they subsequently sent a rover or another probe there, they've gone everywhere but Cydonia.
Correct.
So how can we trust them or rely on them to actually land one where you're suggesting, the Paracelsus crater?
Well, it's interesting that you say we can't trust them. Let me point out something else. The Viking orbiters that went to Mars in 1976 also put down 2 landers in 2 different parts of Mars. And both landers had portable laboratories that searched for life. And would you know that all 3 experiments at each site returned a positive signal for microbial life on Mars? So 6 experiments returned 6 positive results. And what did NASA conclude? That these were simply chemical reactions, and they put it all under the carpet.
They also changed the color of the sky, if I'm correct, because they have a chart on their land as a color bar chart, which the camera's got to calibrate to, and white is one of them. And so when we initially saw the sky, it was blue in some of the early photographs, and then they suddenly changed the color and just declaring to everyone that it was pink or red.
Yes, there was a movement afoot to sort of tell the public on Earth that the other planets are so very much different. The skies of Mars are not necessarily blue. Well, skies on Earth are not always blue, because we have clouds and then the colors change at sunset and sunrise. Similar thing happens on Mars. So whilst it's true that quite a bit of the time the sky on Mars is a sort of a pinkish reddish color, not always. And you're quite right. They did go about changing the color schemes on the screens so that people would not see blue skies on Mars. Which brings me to yet another interesting point. Many years ago on ITV, they showed a short film clip when a spacecraft went to Jupiter and came down through the atmosphere. And the camera on that spacecraft showed blue skies. But I've never been able to see that film again ever. It's almost as though after it was shown on ITV for a few seconds, they decided that this is not for the public to view. We don't want the public to believe that there are blue skies on the other planets in this solar system.
Yep, Vera Lynn will certainly be singing "There Will Be Blue Skies Over the White Martian Dover" or something.
Something like that, yes.
So, where George King was talking about life on other planets in our solar system, then,
yes.
Are we to assume that these are physical beings walking around breathing oxygen like us, or are we talking about something more alternative?
The answer to that question is even more complex than you realize. Just like we have other planes on this Earth, and mediums can contact departed ones who've gone to the other planes on this Earth, the other planets also have other planes. And the more advanced people on the other planes actually can move between the planes. So they have a physical plane, same as the physical plane you and I are on. That's why we can chat with each other through our physical computers. But they are able to access the other planes because of their advancement. So they're both physical and non-physical at the same time. Does that make sense?
We're saying kind of like there may be, for want of a better word, like an ET version of heaven.
Well, put it this way. If they want to make themselves visible when they come to Earth, they can do so. They can also make themselves invisible when they're on Earth, so we wouldn't spot them. But if they made themselves visible, they would look quite physical. You and I would be able to shake hands with them. And as long as they turn their power down, they wouldn't affect us. Because when you're talking about advanced intelligences, advanced races in this solar system, you're talking about people who have vast knowledge and vast capabilities beyond our imaginations. And we've got to be very careful about this, that we don't misunderstand the entire situation. So they are both physical and non-physical. And they can be that at one and the same time, whereas we are generally physical in this life.
Philip, you're also, as well as an author on UFOs, you happen to be a spiritualist medium. I know you don't like that term. What's the term you use to communicate with the spirits? I mean, there's a name you give to yourself, a mediator. What is the word you use?
Interpreter.
An interpreter, yeah.
So basically, it's just an interpretation of data that's coming through from a disembodied personality. So my study of the UFO phenomenon, as you know, was rudely interrupted by the spirit world, as it were, because my life changed. And I hate that word spirit world because it just puts it in a box and seems quite like the media machine used that. But in reality, we're talking about consciousness, souls. And I believe that it's possible that certain extraterrestrial entities are, or some of them could even perhaps be able to remote view like we've been doing on this planet and project their consciousness beyond their realm into ours. And as Ananda said, through their technology of the mind, because everything that's created is through the mind. The mind is the source to absolutely infinity. And if certain extraterrestrials have advanced themselves to the point of, like, it would appear like magic to us. So I do believe that when you hear these cases of people who have stated in the past that they've seen life on this planet, it's possible that the entities, I'm not talking about certain individuals who would have come across as charlatans, mentioning no names, but what I'm saying is that it's rather like someone having a near-death experience. When they have a near-death experience, they pass over. The realm is very real to them. They can interact. They communicate telepathically. And when they come back to this plane of reality, that one is the one that's more real. So abductees, as they call them, when they are shown by the visitors these worlds within our system, and that they support life, it could be that they've elevated themselves to the consciousness or connection of the species and are seeing it as it is within that reality. So I think that, the way that we've looked at this within the UFO field of investigations is that we've kind of like never come away from the physical nuts and bolts aspect of it. We have to look outside of the paradigms of what else could be possible. Mind, consciousness, and this is my argument. Most people believe it's so enormous. It's very hard to pinpoint in a few minutes. But most people believe that we live and that we die, that we're a mechanical machine, a biological machine that works and dies. I do not believe that. I believe that our journey is very important upon this earth plane, and that these entities that come in, it's not just the beginning, middle, and end of this life. We may have had contracts with them. We may even have been part of their worlds in past lives. When I went to a medium once and she read for me, a very good one, and she used to work for the FBI in America, she said to me she picked up on the UFOs, the ones that an experience I'd had, and she said to me, would it worry you if you knew that you were perhaps one of them? And I've never forgotten that statement. I remembered looking at her at the time. I didn't quite understand because I didn't have the total information of what I was looking for. But it made sense to me that, this whole connection of life and evolving and creation and the mystery of life, I think it's really wonderful. There are some bad apples out there, some extraterrestrials, which I always state, Kathleen Marden said, are like cowboys. I just have this, image in my head of these badass aliens going around kicking. But a lot of what we see is very interesting, especially to the material and non-material construct. And we actually represent the same thing. We are physical and non-physical, the same with the extraterrestrial intelligences. So I agree with Ananda on that most wholeheartedly.
So maybe, the kind of thing that I'm forming here is that if there is consciousness or other beings on planets within our solar system, they're presumably outside that Goldilocks zone that we spoke about at the very beginning of the show, where we've got this satellite looking out into distant worlds and trying to find other planets in their own Goldilocks zone. But I presume that by George King's Ethereal Society, that these other consciousness in our locality, i.e. our solar system, are out there for our interests, but there's some bad cowboys coming into town, Philip.
Yeah, I believe that through this study of the ufology, and I can only speak from experience, that through an experience I had that I will not go into, that happened in 1989, I wanted to find out the reality of that experience. Like Ananda and all of us, we want to know how things work and why they happen. And when I was led into the research or theoretical aspect of the phenomenon that occurred in 1989, what people would call an abduction, I was puzzled because the media machine was stating that an abduction happens almost like on a physical level. But from my experience was not. And I discovered later on, by remaining truthful and steadfast, that most people were admitting, yes, it does happen this way. So there was a physical and non-physical construct. And of course, with regards to the UFO field investigations, as I said before, it's so multifaceted. You have different areas like humans, trying to study someone who's a bad person against someone who's a good person. It's almost nigh impossible. But we certainly have patterns with regards to, a certain faction of extraterrestrials. So that's what led me into it. And of course, when you go into a certain area, it opens up other areas that you have to look into. You can't be narrow-minded or just focused on one aspect. You have to look at all aspects of the phenomenon. And to me, the more I examine it, the more it makes sense, not only for the physical, but also the non-physical aspect. And this is exactly why the medium said to me there was a reason why that the mediumship, as people call it, or the interpretation of information from those who crossed over, was necessary in order for me to appreciate the larger construct of the UFO phenomenon, which I'm still trying to work out today. But in terms of a download, Ananda and Neil and Andy, I did have an experience in 1996, which came in the form of what I would call a download. So I never believed in them. And of course, we can be quite ignorant unless something happens to you. And this was a revelation of information with a certain aspect to a species of extraterrestrials, namely the Greys. I'm going to mention their name. And a theoretical aspect came all together, and it was incredible. It was like my mind had opened, and I'd been given the holy grail of information with regards to a certain aspect of them. So I, as I said before, I wouldn't know the first thing of how to allow my consciousness to connect with a higher form of intelligence, i.e. extraterrestrials. I've literally trained my mind to deal with those closer to home, so to speak, if that's the right word to use. So I can appreciate what it must have felt like for Dr. George King when he had this revelation. I mean, to me, no words were spoken. It was more of an explosion of inspiration and knowing. So I kind of tried to put those bits together and think, there is definitely something into this. And that's why I started to explore, certain individuals who have the ability in being able to access information from different energies or consciousnesses outside our physical reality.
Right. And I would also like to add to that, that we mustn't assume that as we go out into space, everything out in space is nice and rosy. We must be prepared to face that there may be hostile races out there. And the fact that we haven't been invaded means we have been protected by the spiritual people out there. So coming back to the question of the other planets in the solar system, the conditions on those planets are very different, as you would agree. Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and so on, they're very, very different from Earth. So it is life not as we know it, but it is life that's more evolved than we know, more advanced than we know, and therefore we will struggle to understand that life until we learn more. And that learning more comes from education. And that is why I have mentioned not only my book and the book that was written by the executive secretary of the Aetherius Society. I'll repeat the title of that book. It's called UFOs and the Extraterrestrial Message. The subtitle is A Spiritual Insight into UFOs and Cosmic Transmissions. Now, as I was telling Philip earlier, in order to establish rapport with very advanced intelligences in this solar system, you have to use something like yoga, meditation techniques to establish that. And that's not easy. It requires many, many years of training. So don't think it's going to happen to somebody overnight. You have to practice yoga for a very long time. And you have to practice the highest forms of yoga that there are on this earth in order to establish that rapport. But once that rapport is established, you can receive vital information, vital not only to yourself personally, but for the benefit of the whole world. And that is why I mentioned Dr. George King's book, The 9 Freedoms. If you have never read that book, read it before you pass on. Because you might not be able to find a copy once you do pass on. So try and get hold of that book. We're all interested in philosophy. We're all interested in the religions of the world. We're interested in the other planes. We're interested in this physical plane. We're interested in the fact that we're polluting and pillaging the surface of our earth. So this book, The 9 Freedoms, will give you many, many answers to many of the questions that you have. And I came across this book in a very strange manner. It was almost miraculous how I came across this book. And I came across this book before I had even heard about George King and the Aetherius Society. So that's another extraordinary story that I mention in my book, which is worth reading and pondering on.
Now, you said, Ananda, in your book yourself that you felt that when you first saw the flying saucers back in 1964, it was for yourself almost a holy experience. Can you expand upon that?
Yes. So let me describe a little bit more about what happened. So this is a week morning. I'm on my way to school with 2 school friends. It was about 10 minutes before 9 in July. So it was a summer morning, a very bright morning. Sun was shining. There were a few fluffy white clouds in the sky. And the 3 of us were engaged in a discussion. Actually, I was having a double debate with one of the friends. I was having a debate about the boxing skills of Muhammad Ali. And with the other friend, I was having a debate about who was the better pop group, the Rolling Stones or the Beatles. And so we're going down this road having this discussion, these 3 schoolboys, when suddenly my head was turned upwards by what I call a mental hook. And there, above us, were these 3 discs, 3 clear flying discs in formation, forming a triangle and moving very slowly, which meant we had an amazing opportunity to study them carefully. They glinted in the sunlight. They were clearly disc shape. There's something underneath which I couldn't quite clearly see, because I later estimated they were somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 feet in altitude based on the clouds. And they flew in formation, maintaining that triangular formation towards a bank of clouds. And at that time, I felt a holy presence. I felt as though I was in the presence of holiness. And by that, I mean that I may have been in the presence of great priests or swamis or great teachers of world religions or something like that. It was definitely a feeling that I was in the presence of holiness. And of course, we observed these objects move towards the cloud bank, and they moved into the cloud bank. We were quite excited by now, all 3 of us, and we waited because we wanted to see them come out through the cloud bank. But they didn't. They went into the cloud bank, and it's as though the cloud bank engulfed them. So I eventually later concluded there must have been a larger spacecraft in that cloud bank, a mothership, if you like.
So they never came out ever again after that? That was it? You just had to leave and get to school?
We were late to school that morning because we stayed there another 5 minutes saying, this object's got to come out of the clouds. They moved into the clouds at a steady speed. How come they haven't come out of the clouds? Then we had to go on to school, didn't we? So that's the way life is sometimes. You have to get on with your life, even though you go through extraordinary experiences.
And Philip, you had an extraordinary experience in Rendlesham Forest in 1997, didn't you?
We did indeed. We had an experience. Was it 1998? I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's 98. We've been going to the forest in 96, 97, 98, and we had performed an experiment. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we had met Peter Robbins, who was an author. He'd come over from America to promote one of his books many years ago.
I know him, yes.
And he suggested that me, my twin brother, and our friend Susan go to Rendlesham Forest because a lot of activity was still happening there. So we'd gone there and we'd seen some strange things. These have been documented in Sky Crash throughout time, which I co-authored with Brenda Butler because I met her out there by chance. I didn't know where she was in the world. But we decided to perform an experiment. And both Ronald, Susan, and I were here in Bedford at home, and we meditated, asking that we have some extraterrestrial intervention. We promised that we would take no filming or recording equipment with us, but we wanted to see them. This is a week before we planned to go there. So the day arrived when we traveled from here to Suffolk, which is roughly about 2 hours drive. And we got there and we settled up. And to cut a long story short, basically, I'd walked into the field where the original UFO was supposedly to have the ones that Colonel Charles Holt and his men saw was supposed to have passed over by. And I found a place where we were to sit with some dowsing rods of all things. And we sat down and we meditated under a full moon and a clear sky. It was a lovely summer month. And then when we'd finished the meditation, we saw this, we thought, first of all, was the farmer's car, but it was a red light, one single red light that was starting to spin like a Catherine wheel. And we started running back towards the other side of the field where the forest, part of the forest was. And then I stopped and realized that it couldn't be the farmer's car. I mean, I'm colorblind, but I know my basic colors, and I know that most car lights aren't red, and most car lights have two, not one. And we realized this light was coming towards us, and then it shot very quickly across the other side of the farmer's crop. So half of his field was crop, and the other half was just barren. And we thought, wow, that was amazing. Whoever they were, have given their sign. And the next thing that happened was that there was a flash of light above these trees, and there appeared, and I can still see it like it happened yesterday, a triangular object that was bright, white, and inside that triangle that's remained stationary, there were lights coming out of it. There was a gap and a circular appendage underneath it. It was the top half was rotating one way, the bottom half was rotating the other way. It was stationary. It was above these trees, and there was a bank of blue lights around the lower appendage of the device. Well, that was it. I took off towards it, and it was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen in my life. And as I was running towards the craft, I was shouting, "Tell me it's a triangle," because I wanted to confirm that what I was seeing was the same as what Ronald and Susan were seeing. So my jeans started to get soaked through the crop, and I was getting nearer and nearer to it, and it was the damnedest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And then when I got under it, I slipped, and as I slipped, it just went out like a light, like someone had turned a light switch off, and I fell onto the ground, took in a load of dirt into my mouth. And then when the others caught up with me, Susan and Ronald, I started to cry, and then I started to laugh because I thought no one in the world would believe us. I mean, this also Neil knows and Andy knows, Ananda, but it has been documented. But I'm not out to get fame or fortune, and I'm certainly not of anyone of real particular interest, because if you're military, then of course you're in. Even though they have a lot of problems through a lot of the things that happened back in 1980. But it answered a question. And I think that whatever forces were responsible for that told me that whatever intelligence had been responsible, they'd heard us through our thoughts. And I had the idea through listening to Karen Carpenter's song, the famous one that she did for UFO Contact called Calling Occupants. I remembered it played because I'm a fan of Karen Carpenter. I loved her music, and I remembered it. And I thought, I wonder if it's possible for us to contact extraterrestrials. We saw no beings. We saw nothing like that. It was just the light, and then afterwards the solid or apparent solid craft, triangular craft, with a circular appendage underneath it. So that answered a very good question. And of course, what's really weird is that no matter how many times people have tried to twist and turn my story, it remains as fact to this day. And we'd written everything out and sent it to a magazine. It all got very strange after that. And I just, I thought, well, it's recorded. It's not really of any interest to anyone, but it was very much of interest to me in what I was looking for. So consciousness, I believed that certain entities are able to connect with us on a conscious level. And that answered, as I said, through my research, something that I was looking for. So that was the event that happened back then. That was a long time ago. But as I said, I can still see it and remember it as though it happened yesterday. And we had a lot of strange experiences at Rendlesham Forest. I think that, there must be some sort of open portal or something there, a residue of something, because this is another note that's been argued. You certainly have portals, very negative portals in some places around the world, Skinwalker Ranch being one of them in Utah. And also you have the Paul Sinclair's is the author of the best-selling Truth Proof books, and he's in the air of Bempton. So we looking at it that way, I didn't feel that the experience that we had was negative with the craft. I think that whatever was that we tapped into, or they tapped into us, was telling us, look, this is what we can do, and we're answering your questions. So it was a very personal experience, like you, Ananda. When you had your experience with seeing the 3 UFOs, it kind of like opens something in you. It's almost like the Holy Grail, a revelation, and then you have to live in a world that is mechanical in nature, and everyone seems locked within their realities. And you've had this experience, and it kind of like pushes you outside the sphere of normal conscious awareness.
Yes, as I wrote in my book, and I quote, "In less than a minute, on this weekday morning, my concept of reality was totally shattered. Everything that I heard from scientists about the existence of extraterrestrial life was proven wrong. And if any scientist said telepathy does not exist, from now on, I would not believe them." And those are words from my book. Yeah. And the reason was personal experience. There's no substitute for personal experience, is there?
No, that's right. And the other thing is that the media outlets, the media machine is so crushing, because I've also been on the rough end of that, where I was so naive. And I really believe that I am being honest and open up front, that the media machine was not. And I realized in my late 20s that how crushing that had been for me. So I kind of like put my hat on the hat up, and I thought, you know what, it doesn't matter now. This is personal, and it's personal to me and what I'm looking for. And it's not like you're out there ringing the bells and wanting everyone to know who you are and what you've gone through and changing their opinions, because that will never happen anytime soon. And not that I want to, God help us, but I was after my own truths. And I think on a personal, spiritual level, if I use that word, it's some form of revelation. It's telling us that, because I had a big hang up about life and death when I was young. And these are questions that no one was answering. They're all like covering it under the carpet. They don't want to talk about it. And of course, these were areas that were passionate to me. I loved the people that were around me. And when they passed over, I had a big hard time dealing with that. And life just didn't make any sense to me. And then, of course, you're dealing with UFOs. And I thought that when the spiritual aspect came out, I thought, my goodness me, there's the man who's studying UFOs, and now he's talking to the dead. I thought my reputation would go right down the pan. But it was so lovely to now connect with many people like your good selves, in understanding that you also are after those answers to the big questions we're looking for.
And Philip, you're not a big fan of the Greys, are you?
No.
Do you believe, or have you had any positive experiences with them at all, or do you believe there is a possibility there could be positive ones, or do you think the whole lot are entirely 100% negative?
Like humans, there are different factions of humans. You have some humans who have their own agendas. This must apply to other factions, other species. I mean, if you go back into the ancient, the antediluvian texts, there was always warrings going on, good and bad, right and wrong. And so I believe that there is I don't believe that all the greys are bad. No, I don't. And I believe that there are other beings, other extraterrestrials out there. That much is certain through the accounts that we've studied and looked at. But the greys have been highlighted more because they operate more on most of them, not all of them, operate on a negative level of reality. But our terminology and their understanding of that, we may be worlds apart. We may be looking at it as negatively, and they may be looking at it in the right thing for them to do. For instance, the Betty and Barney Hill case with the lovely Betty and Barney Hill, Kathleen Marden, she's been superb. Her uncle and auntie had, although it was terrifying to them at the time because they were taking out of their normal world of reality, they had quite a good connection with the greys. They weren't bad. You have these cases where some people have benevolent encounters, but I will tell you quite humorously that I was reminded by one person that had all the answers to everything, and I don't believe any of us do, even though we're looking for them. He told me that the reason I had the experience back in 1989 was because I was a negative person. Now, I can assure you and the listeners that I am the least negative person on this planet. So I think his terminology was way out of line. So he's entitled to his beliefs, of course, but I do believe that there are certain factions. I have studied this certain group of greys because I can only speak from experience, and I wanted to find out why the experience had happened and what they were about. And of course, this opened up a whole barrage of other cases, which is fascinating. So I don't believe that all of them are bad. As Kathleen Marden said, there's probably a rogue group of greys out there, badass greys. Sorry, I've got to use that terminology because it always makes me smile. You've got to have a sense of humor with it as well. It's like
talking about the dimensions aspect of it. Was it Betty and Barney Hill that had the ranch, and they had interactions with spirit and as well as ETs?
No, I don't think. I'm not sure if that's the case.
Which couple am I thinking of? Where there was they had like a ranch in the middle of nowhere, and they were having constant ET kind of occurrences. The public got wind of it and kept going up there and kept kind of, that was their stakeout point.
Skinwalker, whatever
ranch, isn't it? That's in the Utah. That's where they've been doing all the experiments up there, and they've sealed the area off because it's under military jurisdiction, or it was at some point. Then some rich guy came in to buy it, and I think they were trying to study the phenomenon from their level.
Which couple was it? Because it wasn't the Warrens, was it?
I can't remember. I can't recall. I mean, later on, the light bulb might light up. So there's so much in my head. But Betty and Barney Hill, I mean, she seemed to accept the experience. Barney had a hard time with that. So they understandably shattered his perception of reality. But Betty was more understanding of it. And this wasn't the only time that she'd had a UFO encounter. In fact, Kathleen Marden and members of her family had also seen them. So it appears to be something that's an ongoing theme with people like ourselves who have seen UFOs, Ananda as well. It's not just a one-off event. It seems to connect with you on a strong level. It's very bizarre, but we're still studying those aspects or trying to understand the theoretical dynamics behind why that happens.
I think it might be the Skinwalker Ranch. I'm just kind of Googling.
Yeah, that's what I said, Skinwalker.
Skinwalker.
I said slightly the wrong name, but yeah, Skinwalker.
Yes, it was purchased by Robert Bigelow, I believe.
Oh, the multi-billionaire guy that's also involved in spaceships and things. Yeah.
Yes. That's it. But I think the point I was trying to make is that it started off, they were getting UFO encounters and things like abductions and things like that started off fairly negative. But then from what I understand, it went in a slightly more either positive or informative direction. But as they were seeing kind of ETs and UFOs and greys, that they, I think, thought were positive ones, or at least kind of neutral ones. As well as that, they were getting people reporting their dead relatives turning up as well. So it's this kind of this thing about dimensions and
Yeah,
portals
Portal.
into other dimensions, other planes. Actually, I prefer the word planes.
And I kind of said earlier about, slightly off the cuff about, like an ET heaven, but if we take out the word heaven and just put kind of dimension, that opens up a whole can of worms in terms of what might be out there, especially when we pass over. Because when we pass over, do we pass over into, kind of like a human version of a dimension or reality, or do we pass over into like a multi-dimensional, and it's literally, kind of like the Men in Black kind of thing, where they're walking around and you've got all these different aliens walking around with you?
I can give you that answer from the perspective of the Eastern religions. As I said, I was born in Sri Lanka and exposed to Buddhism and Hinduism. Both of those religions have believed in the law of karma and rebirth, reincarnation. So we can't dismiss the beliefs of millions of people. I personally believe in rebirth or reincarnation, whichever word you want to use, and I think and I'm pretty sure when I pass on, I will go to another plane on this earth and be there for a while until my rebirth. Now, how exactly that happens is probably a mystery to most of us, but to those religions, it's been accepted fact, and all believers of Buddhism and Hinduism believe that it takes us many, many millions of lives to evolve upwards. So it's not something that happens in one life or 2 lives or even 7 lives. You have to go through life after life, learning the lessons of life. If you don't learn those lessons, then you have to come back again onto this physical realm, where you're given the opportunity to learn all those lessons and overcome any karma that you have accrued in previous lives. Now, that makes a lot more sense to me than simply believing that this is just one life and that's it, and then you're gone. And of course, you'd meet many mediums like Philip, who would be able to peer into those other realms, if only for a short while, and therefore can tell us firsthand that these realms do exist, and that they are peopled by people who have passed on from the physical realm.
Yes, that's correct. And also my understanding is that one of the interesting aspects is that my understanding is that we are also recording all of our life experiences here, and that the experiences perhaps are being fed back to the one through this ultimate and continual source of creation. And people have asked me, well, what is it like on the other side? I had an experience that I won't go into, but all I can say is that the human part, I was aware of being conscious, but I was not aware of a body. That does not mean to say that I did not have a body or some form of embodiment. Consciousness is energy, and when you're matched by a similar energy construct, then you are real in that realm. The other side is more real than here, and I believe much richer, because the feeling I got from it was totally, I can't explain it in words. There's no words to explain it, but it's more real than here. And it does feel like we're on a journey, and that is the important part. And I do believe also, Ananda, like yourself, that reincarnation is a vital an important aspect to soul evolution. And, you know, the one is probably experiencing more of itself through us as we are through it, through this sharing of creation. And it brings into all sorts of questions about people saying, well, why does this happen in my life? But we have to understand that this life is a fleeting existence physically. It literally is so tiny. And the real life is on the other side. So it's possible, most definitely, that we probably incarnate into other life forms, that when we evolve into those life forms, it seems like as normal as we are here, like no different from someone if you'd been in, back living as a person in the Roman era. You'd look at yourself and think, yeah, this is me. And you're looking at yourself now and you say, yeah, this is me. So I believe that we evolve and we build upon our personality and our knowledge and information So the essence of you doesn't die.
Now, you suggested, Philip, a number of times in the past about the Greys having no, or some of the Greys at least, having no ability to reincarnate. Is that right?
Well, it's literally a theoretical construct with regards to a certain faction of Greys that perhaps have lost themselves to the art of cloning. And the theoretical part dealt with, as you know, with the fact that if the question of whether or not you clone something that doesn't come through the correct process of reproduction or the birthing cycle, that the clone itself, if you create one, it will only have the memory and single spark of one life, physical life. And when it burns out, maybe it's not able to gain entry back into the gateway of what we call heaven. And this is why a certain species of extraterrestrial has amalgamated themselves as to one mind hive consciousness. And what are they interested in? They're interested in reproduction and the hybridization. And this is where that theoretical aspect came in. Of course, it cannot be proven, but it's just maybe a tiny, tiny part to a puzzle that may help aid us in understanding what we are perhaps up against with a certain faction of so-called extraterrestrials. So my argument is, I believe that cloning organs is one thing, but cloning humans might see to our spiritual downfall. And there's many suggestions as well about, you know, the Greys are us coming back from the future. That's nothing new, to salvage what they can from this Noah's Ark of what they've lost. There are many theories that we you know, I'm open to all of them. But I do believe that the Greys are interested in reproduction, and they seem to be interested in why our personalities, our memories, the way we love, we feel. These beings seem to be totally devoid or not understanding of these qualities that we have. And that is one area that I looked into to suggest that perhaps they've lost themselves, they have de-evolved, and that they're trying to reclaim themselves back from the ashes of their downfall.
All very interesting stuff. Well, we're now drawing to the end of the Paranormal Peep Show. So anyone want to add any final words before we say cheerio?
Well, I'm not trying to sell my book, but I am, if you see what I mean. Because of the photographs I've got in my book and my story and the story of the couple from Reading who saw the massive Vimana over the atomic weapons establishment, I would urge all listeners to get a copy of the book and then show it to your local MP. Let's see what the reaction is. Don't be afraid. Do not think they're going to laugh at you. My MP did not laugh at me when I approached him. Quite the contrary. He wrote to the atomic weapons establishment. And lo and behold, 4 months later, he got a reply. So if we're going to move this whole subject forward, the country has to do it the right way. That is, we have to get Parliament involved in a sincere study of this. I told you that I met Dr. George King many years ago. He told me two interesting tales. He said when he received one of these cosmic transmissions that came through and was recorded on tape, he sent a transcript of one of those messages to every member of Parliament by registered post. Now, that cost him a lot of money in those days, you can imagine, sending over 300 letters by registered post. This ensured that he was heard of in Parliament. And you probably know that special branch started investigating George King soon after that. The other thing he told me is that he received a transmission called Radioactivity and Cancer. And he sent a copy of this tape by special courier to the Duke of Edinburgh at Buckingham Palace. So we know all of these were received by the recipients. One, because the letters to the MPs were sent by registered post, and two, the Duke of Edinburgh would have received this transmission that was sent by special courier by Dr. George King. And we do know that Prince Philip has been interested in the subject of UFOs going back to the days of Lord Mountbatten's ranch or his home, where a flying saucer landed or nearly landed and was seen by his gardener. I'm sure you're aware of that story.
Yeah, I do recollect that one.
Yes. Yeah. So just thought I'll put those thoughts out as my closing thoughts.
And do you have a website, Ananda?
I don't have a personal website. The website we have is for the Society for Planetary Sati Research, SPSR. If anyone Googles it, you'll get the link to the website, because that's the scientific studies that we're doing on various aspects of extraterrestrial life. Other than that, of course, the Aetherius Society does have its own website, aetherius.org, and you can go there and see what they have to say, and also listen into some of those extracts from transmissions that they have placed on the website. I think it was Andy who asked me what have they said. They have said a lot.
and it's AE. How's it spelled?
THER. It's ether with an A in front of it, so it's AETHERIUS. So it's the old Greek spelling of the word ether.
I see.
And the IUS at the end indicates the name of a male intelligence, Aetherius.
I see. Okay. And Philip, your book is coming out sometime in 2020.
Philip Mental's Flying Disc Press. He's kindly contracted me to write the book, so that's coming out then. And I will tell you, I've just ordered the 9 Freedoms as paperback. It's on Amazon. So while I was sitting here,
wow, that's brilliant advertising.
Read that book. So, but yeah, I don't have a website as yet. I'm going to be constructing a new website because it's going to be sort of like connected with UFOs as well, and I need to spend some time to get that done. But you can also get the other books. The other books were published by other publishers. But A Passage Through Eternity, The Enigma of the Dead, UFOs and Aliens is available on Amazon. So I had to self-publish that because I was publisherless. But that talks about the theoretical aspects of the soul and the reincarnation and the experiences I've had, and also the greys. But look out for You, the Public Deceived, The Grand UFO Deception. Paul Sinclair has written the foreword for that. And of course, you, Neil, had a lot to do with that as well. So I'm very grateful, and say thank you to Ananda and also Andy as well for your interest and the wonderful conversation we've had. I've loved it.
And Philip, what's this organisation you've recently got involved in as well?
Yeah, that's called NUFORS, which stands for the National UFO Reporting Service. And basically what happened was that Nige R, he's an associate, he set this group up because we were not happy with the fact that the Ministry of Defence had closed their files and their investigations into so-called UFO reports. And of course, this then was given to the Aviation Authority, Civil Aviation Authority. But unfortunately, with regards to the Civil Aviation Authority, they are under EU laws, which means that they control information being administered to the general public, which means, again, that we don't get the real stuff. So NUFORS was created as an independent reporting service for people who have had UFO encounters. And these reports will be dealt with in the most strictest of manners. And we have a large group of organizations starting up now where we're getting people who are training to be reporters and investigators. So I'm one of those. And of course, myself and Nige and, Juliet, Juliet Gregson, she also is involved with this. So our group is starting to build up. So basically, we want an independent reporting service that's not contaminated in any way by, the media or these larger organizations that cap what the public should be told. Because basically, we're not happy with the way that UFO reporting has been administered, because every single time that a report comes through, there's always a cloud over it, like disinformation or lies. So we don't get to the reality of it. Rather like the Roswell UFO crash landing in 1947, we know that something of unknown origin crashed there because it was reported by the very military guys themselves. And if they can't distinguish a disc from a weather balloon, which, by the way, if it was that top secret, they would have been out looking for it, which they hadn't tracked anyway, tells us that we're being misled and lied to. So new fours hopefully will grow in strength, and it is starting to grow with a lot of people that are backing it. So yeah, that's the National UFO Reporting Service. That's quite new, and I'm very proud to be part of that.
And what's their website so that people can check them out?
Yeah, the website is NUFORS, that's N for November, UFO, R for Romeo, S, at proton, PROTON, mail.com. That's NUFORS at protonmail.com. And there's a UK sighting call number, which is 0800 246 5009. That's 0800 246 5009. And of course, if you want to report something or get in touch with us, that is the email or the telephone number that you can call.
And you've also done a petition for this, is that right?
Yeah, we've tried to put a petition together to get Parliament to open up the UFO files. We're still working on that at the moment. We've had 2 unsuccessful attempts, but we're not giving up. We're going to try again. So we are knocking on some very important doors and trying to get diagnosis to say that, although most people may groan and raise their eyebrows thinking there's another group trying to do this and how are you any different from those others that seemingly didn't get very far? Well, we're determined to get far. We're determined to get people in higher seats of power to come to us and to help us, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, good people in positions of great power and authority, who may want to talk to us, and we'll be more than happy to talk to them as well. So if they can give us some backing, then that will be brilliant.
Great. Well, we wish you the best of luck with that then, Philip. Andy, any last words?
No, it's been a very fascinating talk, and hopefully we'll get the guys back on again and do another one soon.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we can only barely scratch the surface of these things, and the more we go into it, the more kind of questions you kind of think of, and there's only so much you can cram in to a few hours. But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. It reminds me a bit that the Aetherius Society, or the good guys, if you like, on our own solar system, are looking out for us, and they're trying to stop the
bad guys,
the bad guys coming into the playground, planet Earth, from these other solar systems, these other planetary galaxies or other dimensions even. But they can't stop them all, I guess. So we have to kind of defend ourselves. We're the children of the group, as it were. I think that's the kind of perception I'm getting anyway.
We're in the kindergarten.
We're definitely in the kindergarten. Yeah, we're a long time before we get to play with flying saucers. Anyway, we'd like to say thank you very much to Ananda and to Philip, and from Andy and myself. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us once more on the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. You can catch up with us on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, and all the other platforms for catch up and streaming and downloading. And you can also catch up on YouTube as well. So we do have our own YouTube recordings going up on there as well. So stay tuned for further recordings in the future, and listen out for more of the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Take care. Bye-bye.